Laughter erupted on the Talarian flagship's bridge as displays showed rusted human warship relics, until the ships rumbled, disgorging swarms of attack drones. "Those floating museums were warships?" Admiral Pollux scoffed, mandibles clicking. His thorax shook as he chortled at the primitive hulks orbiting Arcadia Prime's moon. The relics were remnants of the feeble human resistance during the colony's conquest centuries ago. Now the Talarians were back to finish the job, bombarding the planet's defenses as dropships peppered the surface. Troops scuttled out, plasma guns razing human cities. In the rubble, Karlskora rallied beleaguered defenders. They fired back with particle rifles and railguns, ancient weapons that barely singed the gleaming Talarian armor. Skora knew they couldn't win this fight, not without help. He eyed the skies, past the enemy fleet, to the distant drifting relics. The mothballed warships were his people's last hope. Engineers had labored for decades in secret to refit them with modern weapons, thrusters, and power cores. Now it was time to wake the sleeping giants for a desperate final stand against the alien invaders. Skora's finger hovered over a console, ready to transmit the activation codes. He just prayed it would be enough to save his world and avenge centuries of humiliation at the hands of the Talarians. Even as the battle raged on the surface of Arcadia Prime, a lone Talarian warship detached itself from the main fleet, slipping away towards the derelict human vessels in orbit. The ship's captain, an ambitious climber named Zorval, saw an opportunity to curry favor with Admiral Pollux and advance his own position. He would claim these relics of humanity's feeble resistance as trophies, a symbol of Talarian supremacy. As the sleek Talarian craft approached the darkened hulks, Zorval and his crew couldn't help but mock the primitive design of the human ships, exposed weapon turrets and engines so different from the smooth integrated systems of Talarian warships. The human vessels were in a sorry state, their hulls pitted and scarred by decades of micrometeorite impacts, their once vibrant colors faded to dull grays and browns. Zorval guided his ship into the midst of the lifeless flotilla, moving between the dead ships with a casual disregard. To him, they were little more than space junk, a testament to the weakness and failure of the human race. But as they wove deeper into the floating graveyard, something unexpected happened. Sensors on the bridge of the Talarian ship suddenly lit up, detecting faint energy readings emanating from the derelict hulks. Zorval scoffed, dismissing it as nothing more than an automated distress beacon, some last desperate cry for help from a dying ship. He ordered his comms officer to jam the signal, not wanting to waste any more time on these worthless relics. The Talarian ship pressed on, continuing its journey through the lifeless wrecks. But then an urgent shout from the tactical officer shattered the bored calm of the bridge. Gun turrets on the nearest human ship were moving, slowly turning to track the Talarian vessel's movements. Zorval and his crew had barely a moment to process this impossibility, to wonder how these long-dead ships could possibly be a threat. And then, in a blinding flash, the human turrets opened fire, a storm of projectiles that ripped through the Talarian shields as if they didn't even exist. Zorval opened his mouth to scream a futile denial, to shout "impossible" in the face of his own impending doom. But before the word could fully leave his lips, his ship vanished in a blaze of fire and shrapnel, torn apart by the fury of the human weapons. On the darkened bridge of the Talarian flagship, Admiral Pollux stared in mute horror at the display screen. The signal from Zorval's warship, sent to investigate the human relics, had suddenly winked out. A cold dread crept up Pollux's spine as he realized the implications. "Full sensor sweep of those derelicts now," he barked, his mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. But before the crew could comply, the tactical officer let out a shrill cry of alarm. "Admiral, the human ships they're moving." Pollux whirled to face the viewscreen, his compound eyes widening in disbelief. The ancient hulks, which had drifted lifeless for centuries, were slowly coming to life. Thrusters flared, pushing the vessels out of their long orbits. The ships began to accelerate ponderously at first, but with gathering speed angling towards the Talarian fleet. As the human vessels drew closer, Pollux could see the scars of age and neglect on their hulls, scorched metal, dented plates, faded paint. But the gun turrets, those were different. They gleamed with a dark, oiled menace as they swiveled to lock onto Talarian ships. Pollux shook off his shock, his military training kicking in. All ships, engage those relics, fire at will. But it was too late. The human ships opened fire, a storm of projectiles and energy beams that slammed into the Talarian fleet. Pollux watched in growing horror as his ship's shields, calibrated for the weapons of younger, weaker races, sparked and failed under the onslaught. The human weapons tore through Talarian armor like it was made of paper, ripping ships apart in blossoms of flame and debris. On the surface of Arcadia Prime, Scorer and his battered defenders looked up as the sky filled with falling wreckage from obliterated Talarian ships. A ragged cheer went up as they realized the siege was broken, that somehow, impossibly, the tide had turned. But even as his men celebrated, Scorer felt a chill run down his spine. He watched the human ships carving a path of destruction through the alien fleet, moving with a grim, implacable purpose. These were not the mothballed relics he had sent the activation codes to. These ships were something else, something other. Where had they come from? And more importantly, who or what was commanding them? On the bridge of the Talarian flagship, chaos reigned. Consoles sparked and smoked, filling the air with an acrid haze. The deck shuddered beneath Admiral Pollux's feet as another volley from the human ships slammed into the hull. "Shields down to 23%, the tactical officer shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "We can't take much more of this." Pollux gripped the arms of his command chair, his claws leaving deep gouges in the metal. His fleet was being decimated, his ships swatted from the sky like insects. The human vessels moved with an eerie coordination, their attacks precise and devastating. In a moment of desperate inspiration, Pollux turned to his helmsman. "Ramming speed," he barked. "Aim for the lead human ship." The helmsman, a young Talarian with fear etched into his features, hesitated for only a moment before complying. The flagship surged forward, its engines straining as it accelerated on a collision course. But just as the Talarian vessel closed in, the human ship broke off its attack. Pollux leaned forward in his seat, mandibles clicking in confusion. Had the humans seen the threat? Were they attempting to evade? Then the bridge was filled with a sound that sent icy claws dragging down Pollux's spine. A melody, discordant and haunting, poured from the comms system. It was a song that seemed to worm into the depths of the mind, setting teeth on edge and stirring a primal, unreasoning terror. Pollux clutched at his head, a scream building in his throat as the sound intensified. It felt like the music was boring into his skull, scrabbling around inside his brain. Around him, his crew fared no better. Some covered their ears in a futile attempt to block out the noise. Others clawed at their own flesh as if trying to tear the sound from their bodies. The flagship began to drift. The helmsman slumped over his console, his body racked with convulsions. Pollux could only watch helplessly as his ship veered off course, the human vessels looming ever closer. Down on the surface of Arcadia Prime, the eerie melody echoed across the battlefield. Scorer and his men paused in their fighting, a shiver running through their ranks as the sound washed over them. Scorer frowned, a flicker of recognition sparking in his eyes. He had heard this tune before in the archives of forbidden history, an ancient human war song, banned by the galactic authorities for its ability to inspire madness and despair in those not of Earth. As the realization sank in, Scorer felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind whipping across the ruined cityscape. The derelict ships didn't just possess advanced human weaponry, they wielded psionic capabilities, a technology lost to the ages. The battlefield fell eerily silent as the song reached a crescendo and then abruptly cut off. The human ships ceased their relentless assault, leaving the remnants of the Talarian fleet drifting in the void, broken and burning. In the sudden hush, Scorer and Pollux, though separated by the vastness of space, both felt the same creeping dread. The human ships hung in the void like silent sentinels, as if waiting for some unseen signal. And then a new sound crackled across the comms, a voice that sent shivers down the spines of all who heard it. It was a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of time, filled with a cold, ancient fury. "We are the ghosts of Earth's past," the voice intoned, each word weighted with centuries of rage and pain, "and we have come to reclaim our future." The haunting words hung in the air, the deep rumbling voice seeming to resonate through the very hulls of the ships. On the bridge of the Talarian flagship, Admiral Pollux felt an icy chill run down his spine. "We are the Reapers. We are the end." It was a name out of myth, a legend whispered in the darkest corners of the galaxy. The Reapers, an unstoppable force that emerged from the void to harvest civilizations like ripe grain. A cycle of destruction that had played out countless times over eons. And now it seemed that cycle had begun anew. Pollux shook himself from his momentary paralysis, his military training reasserting itself. The human ships were moving again, but not to press their attack. Instead, they were turning away, accelerating towards the edge of the system. "All ships fire on those vessels," Pollux barked, seeing a chance to salvage something from this disaster. "Target their engines." The Talarian ships opened fire, a barrage of plasma and laser fire that should have reduced the human ships to molten slag. But the weapons had no effect. The human vessels simply absorbed the energy, their hulls glowing briefly before fading back to their dull, battered grey. On the surface of Arcadia Prime, Carl Scorer watched the display with a growing sense of dread. The human ships moved with a purpose that defied the ragged state of their hulls, as if driven by an implacable will. As the fleet reached the edge of the system, a swirling vortex of dark energy bloomed into existence before them. One by one, the ships vanished into its depths, swallowed by the maelstrom, until only the lead vessel remained. It paused at the threshold, as if in contemplation. Then a final message crackled across the comms, a phrase that echoed across the planet's surface and through the halls of every ship in orbit. "We will return." And then it was gone, the vortex collapsing in on itself like a wound sealing shut. Silence reigned, broken only by the distant crackle of flames and the groans of settling wreckage. In the aftermath, Pollux and Scorer were left to survey the ruins of their respective domains. The once proud Talarian fleet was shattered, its aura of invincibility ripped away in a matter of minutes. And though the human defenders had survived, it was a bitter victory. Their cities lay in ruins, their population decimated by the Talarian assault and the devastation wrought by their own unexpected saviors. But overshadowing it all was the spectre of the Reapers and the chilling promise of their return. The cycle had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.